Well, welcome back everyone. It's nice to be back after spending the last month in Europe. Had an absolutely amazing time. But I'm not here to talk about that today. Today I'm here to talk about The Strangers Chapter 1. And well, I guess just to try and salvage this a little bit, in some small way, I'll start off by saying that when I left for Europe, I finished off with a review of Abigail saying that that was one of the best horror movies I'd seen in 2024. And harmoniously enough, I get back and I get smacked in the face with one of the worst horror movies I've seen in 2024, not a doubt in my mind. Or am I being dramatic? I don't know. Let me back this up a little bit. There are a couple of sort of nice things I can say about this movie. But to give you some context, I've never been 100% behind this franchise to begin with. I do like The Strangers, and I do actually enjoy The Strangers Prey at Night as well. That one's more of a guilty pleasure. It's certainly nothing revolutionary, but it is entertaining. But I don't have the strong devoted love for The Strangers that some people do. And furthermore, while it works well enough as an isolated movie, I never really understood why they thought that it needed a sequel or why you would try to expand this into more of a franchise per se, because I don't feel like the premise really lends itself to that personally. Plus, when I first got the announcement for this movie, or watched it, I suppose I should say, it was sandwiched in between at least two other prequel trailers that I got when I went to see Abigail. And it all just kind of had me feeling like it was really lazy to be doing these origin stories and these prequels that no one is really asking for or deep down all that interested in anyway. But I did enjoy a lot of Renny Harlin's movies back in the 90s. He was never my favorite director, but he made enough good action movies that I always saw him as being pretty dependable. So when I saw his name attached to the movie, I was slightly more curious. And having just arrived back and not been in a theater in a while, I was feeling generous, I suppose, so I decided I would give this one a spin. And I say spin deliberately because this movie really ended up spinning its wheels hard for 90 minutes that felt like 2 hours. And here comes the nice thing that I can say, which is that for the first 20-ish minutes, this movie was sort of working for me. I went into it with relatively low expectations anyways, but for those first few minutes, I was thinking this was going to maybe turn out to be a pleasant surprise. I liked the way that it was shot. I liked the sense of tension and atmosphere. There were some well choreographed small jolts, just enough to get the tension simmering. And then unfortunately, the movie kind of stayed at a simmer for the rest of its runtime. Initially, yes, I was appreciating the style. I was getting a bit pulled in by it. That's just me personally, okay? But in any case, it was sort of working for me until I realized we were well into the movie and all I had really seen was a lot of build-up. Everything in this movie is just so padded. It honestly does, once again, feel very long for a 90-something minute movie. And honestly, even within some of the action scenes in this movie, there's a lot of fodder. There's lots of moments that, undermine their own punctuation by adding an extra second or two of pause or belaboring the first shot a little bit longer than they should, and it just sucks all the momentum out of those scenes. Just shaving off every unnecessary shot in this movie would cut, I'm sure, almost 10 minutes out of the runtime and give it a more brisk sense of pace. There's either very little happening, or even when things are happening, it barely even seems to register for the characters themselves half the time. And I don't blame either of the leads for that, really. Madeleine Petsch from Riverdale does what she can, so does Freud Gutierrez. I don't know him as well, but really neither of them has a chance with this script, which was written by, if I remember correctly, Alan Cohen. Despite the fact that it was labored over by him and I think at least two other writers, plus a story that was supposedly laid out by Brian Bertino himself. All they've really done for this first installment of what is supposed to be a trilogy, is essentially remake the first movie, but without any of that first movie's suspense or novelty or sense of style, and a couple that aren't rootable or interesting in any way. The early passages where we get to know them a little bit better aren't bad, but as the movie wears on, again, it just kind of stalls their relationship in terms of even changes and dynamics from one end of the movie to the other, it never really finds third gear. It always, at least to me, feels like they're either bickering at each other, or even when they're being relatively nice, there's this, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but this weird underlying sense of condescension from one person to the other. I mean, both ways. And I don't really think it was deliberate personally, but it just feels like the way that Renny Harlin directed them, they were just really given nowhere to go. So both of them are putting out different signals with their acting that never quite mesh. There's no real chemistry to speak of whatsoever. It really does feel like the two of them just got to set that day and did a dry run through reading the lines and went to camera without giving it much rehearsal or reflection. But again, like that old song said, nothing from nothing leaves nothing. It really does feel like all the principal talent involved in this just kind of inherited a doomed project. I honestly do not know why this movie exists. It does not expand on the lore of The Strangers in any way. It doesn't give us any more reason to care about any of the characters that we saw in either of the previous movies. If you are vying to go more of an anthology route with this one, then that's just fine. But then that's all the more reason to really dig deep and make this one something that has a splash and a bit of special character to it in order to validate making an anthology entry in this series. And it's that lack of purpose and drive that ultimately sinks this for me. When you're dealing with a franchise that was birthed from a movie where the central point of the antagonists was that they were doing this in a very random and nihilistic way, just repeating that scenario over and over gets tired. And even still, it didn't have to feel this tired. Okay, I mean, say what you will about Strangers 2 Pray at Night, but at least that movie is entertaining. This movie is about as much fun as watching Milk Age. Almost all I have to say about this, really. I could go into detail, but frankly, I don't want to. I don't feel like the movie really deserves it. Based on this, I'm certainly not excited about seeing another 2 in this franchise, but I will, on the off chance that the complete story does in some way validate, the snooze that was this first movie. I mean, but if this doesn't lead to something exceptionally surprising in one of the next 2 installments, then this review stands. Honestly, I don't know why they didn't just release all 3 installments at once on streaming. Like, of all the movies, of all the independent horror movies that could have gotten a theatrical release, this is the one that made the cut. There are independent feature films, okay, not miniseries, but features available on streaming that have been popping up over the past several years that are doing extraordinary things in horror. Things that are funny, original, ambitious, clever, made by people who have a genuine zeal and abandon for what they're doing. This is not one of them, but there it is sitting on the big screen, and we wonder why theaters are suffering. If you're still watching at this point, I can tell you for good and all, skip this one. It is really not worth your time unless you're like a big fan of this franchise or some sort of devoted Strangers completionist. For anyone looking for something that's actually solid entertainment, please look elsewhere, and based on this standard, you won't have to look very long. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Look for more content in the coming days. It's nice to be getting back into this, and I will see you next time.